Okay, for this video, we're going to solve an absolute value inequality. And with absolute value inequalities, you do have to look at what sign is given to you. And there's two rules that you will use. If it's less than or equal to, then you always use and in between. These end up being compound inequalities. If you remember, with solving absolute value equations, there's always two values that have the same absolute value from 0. So if it's less than or equal to, so if it's pointing to the left, then you always use and. If it's greater than or equal to, then you always use or. The play on words that I use with this to teach my students when I'm teaching this in class is I will use great or. So if it says great or, it helps you to remember or. If it's less than, I use and. So if you can just find any way to help you remember which way it goes. With this, remember that what we are doing is we are looking for all values that I can plug in for x that my output will be greater than 10. So since we have absolute value, remember the absolute value of 10 is 10 and the absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So we're looking for all values that make it larger than that. So once you decide whether you're using and or based on the inequality sign, for this one we'll use or, you would set it up where you take whatever's on the inside, the 2x plus 2, and then you would use the same symbol. We would just write it exactly how it is without the inequality sign. For the second equation, remember that this has a second inequality that we have to solve. So this is an or inequality. You have to remember that when this becomes negative, because we always set it up as, like if you go back to solving absolute value equations, we would set it up as 2x plus 10, 2 equals 10, and 2x plus 2 equals negative 10. But with this, remember that when we change the sign of the value, we must also change the inequality sign. So this must switch to less than. So our two inequalities that we would have to solve is 2x plus 2 is greater than 10, or 2x plus 10 has to be less than negative 10. So those are what we are looking for. So with this, we would subtract 2 from both sides and end up with 2x is greater than 8. And then if we divide both sides by 2, we would end up with x is greater than 4. For this, as far as the process steps goes, it's exactly the same. We would start by subtracting the 2, but since they now have the same sign, you would add them same as sum and keep the sign. So we would have negative 12. So don't just get lazy and go, oh, I can just put 4 and negative 4. It doesn't work that way. So we see that x is less than negative 6. And the reason this has to be an or inequality is because there is no number that is both greater than 4 and less than negative 6 at the same time. So either of these would give us the correct solution. So if we saw a visual picture of this, basically what happens is if we go over to 4 this way, we're looking for all values that are greater than 4, so to the right of 4, or all values that are to the left of negative 6. If this had to be an and inequality, it wouldn't make sense because you can't make both of these true. It's either one or the other. So as far as checking to make sure your solution makes sense, we can always plug in something that doesn't, that's not included. So like 0, if I plug that in, 0 plus 2 would give me 2, and 2 is not greater than 10. So we can see that this value in between here isn't true. So if we picked a value, say 5, 5 is greater than 4. If I plug that in, 2 times 5 gives me 10, and 10 plus 2 is 12. So we can see that the way that the arrow is going, it makes sense for our solution. We could also pick a value down here, say negative 7. 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. Negative 14 plus 2 is also, it's negative 12, but the absolute value is 12, which is still greater than 10. So we can see that whether we pick a value that it's below negative 6, or if we pick a value that's greater than 4, that it works in our given absolute value inequality. So as far as writing the answer goes, depending upon the course that you're in, you can leave it like this is a completely acceptable answer. If you have to write it in set notation, then all you would have to do is you would put your brackets and x such that x is less than negative 6, or x is greater than 4. Okay, if you're in a course where you're dealing with interval notation, for interval notation, remember that we always start from left to right. So the lowest value that we have is negative infinity. Since there really is no lower limit, it continues to go to the left forever and ever. We would stop at -6, and it does not include it, so we use a parenthesis for the -6. So everything like -6.0001 would be included. That's why we start with the -6. And then we would put the union or the or symbol. This is read as or in math. And then we would start again at 4. It does not include the 4, so we would again use a soft parenthesis, and then it continues to positive infinity. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or there's any topics that you need help with that you don't see, please just let me know.